Well, good morning. Welcome to interpersonal relationships class. This is lesson 17, and it's our final class period for interpersonal relationships. This has been an enjoyable class for me. I hope it has been for you. Next Sunday, we're starting a new class, and I gave it the title, God in Genesis. And it's a really foundational class, I think, and it's going to probably be about a year-long class. And what we're planning to do is look at God, first of all, and then how his awesome power, obviously, in creation. We're going to be looking at creation versus evolution, and a lot of those topics. We're going to be looking at the great flood of Noah, and interesting topics like that. But we're also going to be looking primarily at how God related to people. And I'm going to try to make each one of those classes very practical, not only in basic knowledge about God and theology, but try to make it applicable for us today to something we can really get a foundation in there. And if you think that you'd like a foundation in your belief structure, I think this is a good place to reinforce that. Okay, this morning's class is Jesus taught relationships. And I'm using it as kind of a wrap-up for this class. Jesus taught relationships, 5 relationship principles that Jesus taught. And it's a recap for the class. I believe that Jesus came to die for sinners as his primary purpose to come to earth, but secondarily to serve as an example, a model for us how to live, how to do relationships. He related to people, all kinds of people. He didn't shun those who were low-class people. He didn't shun the sinners. He didn't shun those who other people would have run away from, but he modeled a good relationship with everyone. Some of them his relationships weren't the best with, like the Pharisees and so on, but he did relate to them. Jesus showed us how to do relationships, and I want to use a scripture that's very familiar to you as kind of a basis for this class. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." You probably, when people have talked about this passage, have heard the focus be mostly on "take my yoke upon you." But this morning I want to zero in on that phrase, "learn from me." Learn from Jesus. Welcome. Learn from Jesus in how to do relationships. Learn from his teaching how to do relationships. Relationships are really complex. I know you know that already. And we can get some real insights from how Jesus did relationships. We want to look this morning at 5 different principles that Jesus gave. The first one we're going to be looking at is relationships must be our first priority. Second one is we are to love as Jesus loved. Third one is communication comes from the heart. Judgment comes around. And greatness is found in serving, which we talked about last Sunday. Okay, then the first one is relationships must be our first priority. And we introduced the class some 4 months ago with this concept. Relationships must be our first priorities. One of the scribes, this is from Mark 12, came and heard them disputing with one another. And seeing that he answered them well, he asked him, "Which commandment is the most important of all?" Jesus answered, "The most important is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other greater commandment than these." So the greatest expectation, welcome. The greatest expectation that Jesus showed for his followers is to have loving relationships. The greatest expectation that Jesus has for us today is the same, to have loving relationships. And as we talked about in class, the relationships are with God, they're with others, and with ourselves. The greatest expectation that Jesus had for his followers is loving relationships. Relationships are great things. They can also be very painful things. They can be so difficult but so rewarding. But we cannot overdo the importance of good relationships. Gary Smalley says, life is relationships, the rest is just details. What do you think about when you walk through past a coffin in a viewing? How many of you have been to a viewing here not too long ago? Young people don't go to viewings so much. But you're walking past that coffin. What's coming to your mind as you look at that coffin and the body that's in there? What's your primary thought process?
One thing I think about is death is so final.
It's so final, that's just death. There's just death there. Yes.
I think about the fact that they're not really there anymore.
Okay. One of the things I'd like you to think about the next time you go to one of these things is that I can't take anything with me other than relationships. I'd like you to think about that. That person that's laying there in that coffin is not able to take anything with him other than his relationships that he has made while he's here. His relationships with his family, hopefully he'll see them again. His relationship with God, obviously, is going to be renewed when he gets to heaven if he's a Christian. And his relationship with other people that he has formed over his lifetime, he can take those along. He can take those along with him, but he can't take anything else with him. It's a sobering thing, and I'd like for you to think about relationships that way. It's your relationships that you built in this life is what you can take along with you. And none of your material belongings are going along. How important are the relationships that that you have? Jesus took time for people, always took time for people. All kinds of people were important to him, those with influence and those with less influence. Relationships are more important than money. I know you know that, but I want to reemphasize that. Relationships are more important than money. Jesus taught that God would take care of our physical needs if we put his kingdom first. Relationships are more important than tasks. The tasks that you have to do, and all of us have tasks that we need to get accomplished in life. But relationships are more important than tasks. I'd like you to go with me in an example with Jesus for just a minute. This synagogue ruler had come to him and said, "Look, my daughter's dying. Would you please come?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll come, And as he was going along, all of a sudden, he felt this touch. And this woman had touched him to be healed. And he could have been thinking, okay, look, I got to get on with this task. I got to get over here and heal this young girl. But he stopped and he engaged this woman. And the relationship was so important to him. And for us, something I'd like to impress on us is that relationships that we develop are more important than our tasks. Take time for relationships. Stop and take time to talk to some people. You've got this load of things to do. You've got these things that are pressing in on you, and I've got to get this task done. And some of you are very task-oriented. I am one of those. I want to get this job done. I've got this job. I'm going to rise to this occasion and get it done. But stop and talk to people. The person that you're dealing with may be in this task. And relate to them. And that is so important. Jesus took time for people. He took time for the children. He took time for the multitudes. He took time for a woman who was looked down by everyone, a woman that came to draw water at a well. This woman had struggles with relationships. She had had 5 marriages that failed. And the 6th one was in the progress and was probably going to fail. Jesus took time to talk to engage this woman. A healthy relationship with God and healthy relationships with others have the power to keep our commitment to the things and tasks in our lives from getting out of balance. So that's the first principle I want to touch base with you this morning, is that relationships must be our first priority. Any comment that you would have about this? For many of you, relationships are not your thing. Okay, you don't naturally relate as well. But I would encourage you to go beyond your comfort zone, reach out and make relationships a priority. Okay, principle number 2: love as Jesus loved. And this is a scripture that's very familiar to all of you probably. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Command from Christ to love as Jesus loved. The first thing that comes to my mind when I look at this scripture is, how is this possible? How is this possible? Anybody have a comment? How can I actually love the way Jesus did? Seems impossible. What resource do we have?
Rely on Jesus.
To rely on Jesus for strength to do it, to give us that. And the word picture I have for you on that is, Jesus said, I am the vine, you are the branches. Abide in me and I in you, and you will be able to bear much fruit. And so Joel's comment there is that we can't do it on our own. I can't love as Jesus did. If someone spits me in the face, I'm probably not going to be as loving as Jesus was. Someone does me wrong in a business deal, I'm probably not naturally going to be as loving as Jesus was. But this is a command. This is Jesus' expectation for us, is to love as he did. And it's really, really a tough command. Someone else have a comment. How can I, here, have a hand up. How can I love as Jesus loved?
Love is one of the fruits of the Spirit. You want to be indwelled with the Spirit in order to do it.
Okay.
And it's a dying to self. It's an unselfish act.
Okay.
And a choice, even when you don't feel like it.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. It is a fruit of the Spirit that the Spirit works in us. And the power obviously comes from God to be that kind of unselfish. The way to love as Jesus did often starts with an emotion or an action. It starts with an action. It often does. Do the loving thing. I don't feel like it. I don't feel a bit like it. I don't feel a bit like it, but go ahead and do it anyway. It often starts that way. Did Jesus desire the cross? We know he didn't, but he did it anyway. Did he feel some emotion of love on the cross? He probably did. I'm sure he did. He forgave those who did that for him. I want to share with you a story of difference of two men. A real life story, a true story about two men. One who lived with his emotions. His emotions drove him. Another one who decided to act out in love. And I'm sure then the emotion came later. It's a story of two Ernests. As a picture of the difference between being governed by your feelings and being strengthened to act by your feelings, consider the lives of two Ernests. Well-known author Ernest Hemingway and little-known missionary Ernest Fowler. Ernest Hemingway is universally acclaimed as one of the great American authors. Brimming with natural talent, his life was governed almost entirely by what he felt like doing at any given moment. In the end, he shot himself to death, as did his father before him and his brother after him, because that's what depression drove him to feel like doing. It's amazing that with such a tragic end, there are still some today who look to emulate his lifestyle. His was a life and talent wasted, because in the end he could not control the emotions that had governed him. 5 years after Hemingway's death, missionary Ernest Fowler also died of a gunshot wound. His was not self-inflicted, but came at the hands of bandits who attacked his missionary home and family. Fowler and his family had moved to northeastern Colombia in order to reach out to the Motolan Indians, a tribe that had been close to his heart since he had first hacked his way through the jungle to meet them in 1943. On a fateful day in July of 1966, Ernest had taken his daughter Valerie and their live-in household helper on a picnic. The Fowler's son Johnny had his 14-year-old friend David Howard over to visit. Now a seminary professor, David gave an eyewitness account of the events of that day in a sermon he preached in 1994. He tells of 7 men who came to the Fowler's home dressed as policemen, but they were bandits, not policemen. It was the practice of the bandits in this region to rob a house, kill everyone inside, and then burn it to the ground. But on this day, they robbed the home, locked everyone in a small washroom, and left. As they fled down the path away from the home, the bandits met Ernest and the 2 girls returning from their picnic. In the end, one of the bandits fired 2 shots at Ernest, and he died instantly. The girls escaped unharmed and made their way back to the Fowler home, where they informed everyone what had happened. The family rushed to the place where Ernest lay dead, and they carried the body back to their home. After the funeral, David Howard recalls hearing Fowler's wife capture the spirit of her husband's life with the words, "Ernest was always ready to step aside for those in a hurry to get ahead, and to step back and help and encourage those who were lagging behind." Howard summed up his lessons from this experience this way: Ernest Fowler did make a difference because he was faithful in all things, large and small. Ernest Fowler got dirty many times and served others his whole life. Ernest Fowler was faithful even to the point of death in his ministry for Christ and his concern for others. Ernest Hemingway took his life. Ernest Fowler gave his life. That's the difference between loving as Jesus loved and making it a priority. Principle number 3, we talked about this at least one Sunday, maybe 2. Communication comes from the heart. Jesus taught that communication comes from the heart. Relationships are fueled by communication. Our relationships are fueled by the way that we talk to people, the way we communicate with people. We know how important it is. We need the right kind of fuel. The wrong kind of fuel will damage our relationships. James says that the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. So the tongue can be used for good, constructive communication, or it can basically damage your relationships. The word spoken in anger can often damage relationships that may never be repaired. Jesus was a good example of how to communicate. The foundation for all communication is trust. People trust what you say, or they don't trust what you say. They trust you as a person, or they don't trust you. If people cannot trust what we communicate, it doesn't matter how eloquent we are. Communication is complex. Communication experts say that the words we speak to others can actually produce 6 distinct messages. And you don't need to remember these. What you mean to say, what you actually say, what the other person hears, what the other person thinks he hears, what the other person says about what you said, and what you think the other thinks about what you said. It's very complex. Communication is very complex. And in our relationships, as we talked about for a couple of Sundays, is that we need to be very careful in our communication, how we come across to people. It's not only the words that we say, but how we say them, when we say them, if we're willing to talk to people about things that are going on. Is there trust in what we're saying? Do we break promises? Is there openness? Is there honesty? Is there commitment? Is there lack of judgment? There is a connection between our heart and our mouth. Our heart and our mouth are connected. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, Jesus said. Out of the abundance or the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So it's important what's in our heart, because that eventually will come out. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. If your heart is full of hatred or bitterness, eventually that will come out. If your heart is full of love, it will come out as well. Okay, the fourth principle is that judgment comes around. I don't know if you've heard that saying, but judgment comes around. The way we judge, we will be judged. The way we judge people, that is the way that we will be judged. If we're extremely critical of other people, and you know someone like that, maybe you are that way, I don't know. If you're very critical of other people, that is the judgment that's going to come around to you as well. I'm thinking of an incident in Jesus' life. They brought her before Jesus as he taught on the temple grounds. They were the religious frauds of Jesus' day. Righteous on the outside only. They were trying to catch Jesus in his response to the law and sin. They had caught her in the act of sin. They wanted to see if Jesus would condemn her. They were setting a trap for the master. Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground. Don't know what he wrote. Anybody want to take a hazard? What did Jesus write? I'd be interested to hear what you thought. What did Jesus write in the sand? They came and they were asking Jesus, what are you going to do with this woman? And he just bent down and just started doodling in the sand. I think he was actually writing things in the sand. What do you think he was writing?
Tell us what you think.
Pardon me?
You tell us what you think he was writing.
I don't know what he was writing.
I heard one person say already, they think he was writing the sins of the other people.
He might have been. I've heard that too. It's a good thing to think about. You know, maybe he was including some of the things that hypocrisy, stealing widows' homes, making long prayers for show, whatever. Somebody thought maybe he was writing out the 10 Commandments on the ground there, and it didn't include just adultery, or it didn't just include this. It included things like, don't covet your neighbor's, wife, don't steal, don't all these things that all these religious frauds were actually guilty of also. But anyway, he stooped on the ground and wrote on the ground. Don't know what he wrote. Jesus said, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." They were all condemned in their conscience and left one by one. All of those hypocrites, starting at the oldest. Judgment comes around. You're critical, you're judgmental of others, you will be judged in that way also. Matthew 7 says, "Judge not that you be not judged, for with the judgment you pronounce you will be judged, and with the measure you use it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. There's basically three aspects of relational judgment that Jesus spoke of in these 5 verses. And we want to look at those. First of all, say no to hypocrisy. You're basically judging other people, and you're guilty of the same sin. Hypocrisy is what? If I'm being a hypocrite, what am I doing?
Lying?
Lying, yes. I am definitely lying. Somebody know where the word hypocrite comes from? It's putting on a mask, is what a hypocrite is. It's basically putting on, you become an actor. You're putting on a mask. And some of us put on masks every day. We live behind masks. We're as bad as the people on Broadway who go do one show, they put on a mask, and then they go back, and then they put it on again the next day again and do another show. We live a life of hypocrisy. And I think Jesus is saying basically, say no to hypocrisy. Don't pretend. You know, it's the people that really matter are going to be able to see through that mask anyway. But for many of us, it's more threatening, less threatening to put on a mask than it is to be our real selves. We're more concerned about appearance than reality. But God isn't impressed with appearance. Man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. And Jesus had a special dislike for hypocrisy. The people he had struggles with in his relationships were those people who were hypocrites. What did he call them? What did he call the hypocrites? What's some names that he used for them?
Whited sepulchres.
Whited sepulchres. Basically a whitewashed sepulcher that was, you could walk by there and they had painted it up nice with whitewash. Inside there's full of all kinds of deadness and what have you. What's another word picture that Jesus used? What kind of did he call those hypocrites?
He talking about a brood of vipers.
A brood of vipers. He called them snakes. Vipers doesn't sound as bad as snakes, but they were snakes. He said, you snakes. You're a bunch of snakes. What else? If you go to Matthew chapter 22, I think it is, and it's just one list after another of things that Jesus called hypocrites. So Jesus had real struggles with hypocrites. What does he think about us when we put on masks? When we pretend to be what we're not? We're to say no to hypocrisy. What are some of the masks that we put on? You might have a couple on your shelf.
I'm fine.
I'm fine. Okay. Cheerful. Terribly cheerful looking person. Good looking person. Inside I'm not that way. Some of us come to Sunday school. That's a mask that we put on. You shouldn't stop coming to Sunday school. Don't get me wrong. But and many of these masks, they're good things. They're good appearances that we're putting on, but we need to take care of the inside, I guess, is what I'm saying. Number 2, say yes to integrity. So hypocrisy is basically pretending we don't have a problem. saying yes to integrity is removing the plank from our eyes, taking care of the stuff that's inside. And he says you first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll be able to deal with others. Come clean. Say yes to integrity. We must choose to be honest. Confess our sins to one another and pray for one another, James says, that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it's working. Integrity. Driving need for us is integrity. Finally, say now to mercy. And that's the third step in this whole planking and splinter thing, is say now to mercy. After you have taken that plank out of your own eye, go over to your brother and sister and remove the splinter out of their eyes. Okay, Jesus is not asking us to isolate ourselves, but to help other people. Mercy is removing the speck from your brother's eye. Mercy is not optional in our relationships. No more than getting rid of hypocrisy and saying yes to integrity. If you want to experience God's mercy in our experience, we must reach out in mercy to our brothers and sisters. Sometimes this may include forgiveness that is very costly to us and very difficult. Colossians 3:12 says, "Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony." The final principle that I want to cover here, and I'm sure there would have been more in Jesus' teaching, is greatness is found in serving. And this comes just from last week's Sunday school. Greatness is found in serving. The measure of greatness is service. And I'd like to remind you of a story that Jesus basically gave. In Matthew 20, he says, "And the mother of Zebedee came up to him with her sons. Kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, 'What do you want?' She said to him, 'Say that these 2 sons of mine are to sit, one on your right hand and one on your left in your kingdom.' Jesus answered, 'You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?' They said to him, 'We are able.' He said to them, 'You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those to whom it has been prepared by my Father.' And when the 10 heard of it, they were indignant at the 2 brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, 'You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be the first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." We all have some desires for greatness, and Jesus taught us that we need to translate our desires for greatness into acts of humility. Every day we face a simple test of greatness. Every day you will. Tomorrow morning you will face a test of greatness. And you can check one of these boxes. I will exalt myself. I will humble myself. Will you be great or will you not be great? Will you just think you're great? I can exalt myself today or I can humble myself. We can check one of those. It's a choice that we make. It's a daily test. A litmus test that you can check off every morning as you go about whatever your responsibilities are going to be. Going to school, doing whatever, going wherever, to work. I will humble myself or I will exalt myself. That's your choice. The Bible teaches very clearly that it's something we choose to do. Somebody want to venture an example of what that might be. How that might be fleshed out tomorrow for you or for someone that you could think of. What are you going to do tomorrow that will show that you're going to be a servant rather than a lord over other people? What are you going to do? This has got to be very practical. What are you going to do tomorrow that is going to be a measure of greatness? We cannot have good and growing relationships unless we are humble. Pride, as we talked about way back whenever, is that thing that insulates us from people. With the choice to humble yourself, you begin to see the world differently. Instead of always needing to be noticed by others, you begin to notice others' needs. You're no longer the sole focus of your soul's attention. You find a refreshing freedom to see, to care about, and to act on the needs you see around them. I honestly don't think God cares about what logo is on your clothes or insists you buy the lowest model car. I don't think God cares about that. He doesn't care about those things so much. You don't have to drive a Hyundai to be holy. But God does care about why you're doing things. Are you being a servant? Are you being humble? Or are you doing it to exalt yourself? That's what God cares about. Humility is a daily quiz, a daily decision that we will make. And it results in greatness or not. Okay, that wraps up our class for today and for this interpersonal relationships class.